Chapter 16, November 7th. Mrs. Nesbit died. I don't know when, but she was in bed, and I'd like to think she died in her sleep. Her eyes were closed, and she looks peaceful. I kissed her cheek and covered her face with the top sheet. I sat silently by her side for a while, mostly to see if I was going to cry. But I didn't, and I knew I couldn't sit there forever, no matter how peaceful it was. I knew she wanted us to have everything, but I made a point of taking out her diamond pendant and ruby brooch first. Then I went downstairs and took the two paintings off the wall she wanted Matt and Johnny to have. I piled all the things on the kitchen. I piled all the things on the kitchen table and tried to decide what to look at next. What I really wanted to do was go through her kitchen cabinets and see what food she had left, but the very thought of it made me excited, and that didn't seem like the proper way to feel. It made me feel like a cannibal. So I found a flashlight and started with the attic. I didn't know what I was going to find there, but Mrs. Nesbit had told me to go to the attic, to the cellar, and I had no desire to go to the cellar. The attic was filled with boxes and trunks. It was ice cold in there, so I knew I didn't have the energy to go through every single one of them, so I hopped from box to box. There was lots of old clothes, which I didn't think would help any of us. There were boxes of papers, accounts from Mr. Nesbit's business. I opened a box called Bobby's Things, and I found something great in there. Most of the stuff was from school, papers he's written, letters he'd gotten from being on the school basketball team. But towards the bottom, I found a shoebox filled with old baseball cards. I thought about how John didn't get any birthday presents, and I'd clutched that shoebox. I'd surprise him with it at Christmas, or before Christmas, if I didn't think we'd make it that long. I went downstairs and then walked through through the bedrooms and looked in the closets. There were enough clean towels and washcloths that Mrs. Nesbit must not have used. Clean sheets, blankets, and quilts. No matter how warm we might be in the sunroom, extra blankets seemed like a good idea. There were boxes of tissues I knew we can use and rolls of toilet paper, aspirin, painkillers, cold remedies. I took a clean pillowcase and started putting stuff in there, starting with the baseball cards. I didn't put any of the blankets in there, but I did throw in some towels and washcloths. There wasn't any logic to what I put in and what I left out. I'd be sending Matt over to fill the car, and he'd pick up anything I forgot to take. Then I allowed myself to go to the kitchen. I opened the cabinets and saw cans of soups, vegetables, and tuna and chicken. All the stuff we've been eating for months now. There wasn't enough for us to eat 3 meals a day, but every can would keep us alive a bit longer. And I knew without telling her that Mrs. Nesbit had been going hungry so we could have the food. I thanked her silently and kept looking. In the back of the cabinets, I found a box of chocolates unopened with a Happy Mother's Day card attached. Mrs. Nesbit was never one for chocolate. You would have thought her son knew that. I took the chocolate and put it at the bottom of the pillowcase along with baseball cards. I couldn't decide whether to give it to Mom at Christmas or on her birthday. Then I realized there was a funny noise in back of me. I turned around and saw the kitchen faucet was dripping. I grabbed a pot under it and grabbed a faucet and turned it on. Actual water poured out. Mrs. Nesbit's well hadn't run dry. There was only one of her, and she hadn't used up all her water. Her insistence on keeping the heat had prevented the pipes from freezing. I grabbed lots of cans and unopened boxes of raisins and rammed those in the pillowcase. Then I went through the entire house, top to bottom, looking for containers of water. Everything I found that could possibly hold water, bottles, jugs, canisters, barrels, I dragged in the kitchen. I filled all of them for the joy of hearing running water. I was tempted to pour myself a glass of water and drink it, but even though the water was probably clean, I knew it should be boiled first. But then I took thought to look in Mrs. Nesbit's refrigerator. Sure enough, she'd been using it for storage space, and there was an untouched 6-pack of bottled water. I let myself drink one. It was all I could do from gulping it down in 3 giant swallows. But I sipped it like fine wine. It's funny, all the food in there, I wasn't even tempted by any of it, but I couldn't resist the water. Then, just because I could, I took a washcloth, damped it in the sink water, and washed my face and hands. Soon I took off all my clothes and gave myself a sponge bath. The water was cold and the kitchen wasn't much warmer, but it was glorious feeling clean again. I got back into my dirty clothes and slipped the 5 bottles of drinking water that I could into what was starting to think of my Santa bag, and I realized I couldn't carry much more. There's no way I could manage to take the paintings, but I put the 2 pieces of jewelry in my pants pockets. I heaved the bag over my shoulder and went out the kitchen door. I've been alternating between walking on the road and through the backwoods to get Mrs. Nesbit, so I knew no one would think it was suspicious they didn't see me on the road. I only hoped no one would see me in the woods, since if they saw the Santa bag, they knew right away that I'd been taking things from Mrs. Nesbit's house. If anyone got there before Matt, we'd lose the food, water, and everything. I walked as fast as I could, cursing myself to having filled the pillowcase with so much stuff. It was one of my non-brunch days, and I was hungry. The water gurgled in my tummy. stomach. I spotted Matt and John chopping away. They'd cut firewood for Mrs. Nesbit, I remembered. More stuff for them to take from her house. For a moment, I was torn between speaking to them while I was still holding the bag or going to the house to drop the bag off and then going to talk to them. But I have to tell Mom if she saw me carrying stuff in. I was happy to postpone that. So I positioned myself with the bag behind a tree just in case someone could see me talking to Matt and John. Mrs. Nesbit died. She told me a few days ago to take everything we could use. She still has running water. Her car has little gas in it. Where is she? She's in her bed. Peter told her the hospital was taking bodies, and she said we should bring her there if it was easier for us. We had a long talk about these things a few days ago. Do I have to do that? Do I have to go in? No, Matt said, but you do have to help bring stuff over. There's a wheelbarrow in her garage. We can fill it with firewood and you take it back here. Miranda, would you mind going back in? No, of course not. Okay, then. We'll strip the house. Do you have any idea how to drive? The gas pedal makes it go and the brake makes it stop. Matt grinned. You'll be fine. We'll drive the van there and we'll bring all our empty bottles and jugs so we can fill them with water. We'll load things up and I'll drive the van back and you'll drive Mrs. Nesbit's car. Then I'll go back and get Mrs. Nesbit and take her to the hospital. By the time I get back, the house will be ransacked, but we'll have gotten everything out we can. When you go back for Mrs. Nesbit, I'll fill up the car again. Honestly, she wouldn't mind. Okay, take the bag in and tell Mom. John, you come with me. Let's get water containers. So we all went back to the house. Mom was sitting on her mattress staring at the fire. She heard me come in and saw the pillowcase. Where did you get that? It's Mrs. Nesbit's. Mama, I'm sorry. It took her a moment to realize what I was saying. Then she took a deep breath. Was it peaceful? Could you tell? She died in her sleep, just the way she wanted. That's the best we can hope for, Mom said. When we got to Mrs. Nesbit's, Johnny stayed outside and loaded the wheelbarrow with wood. Matt and I went inside. Matt filled the containers we brought with water, and I packed up the blankets and towels and sheets and food and photo albums and the 2 paintings. While we were in the kitchen, John raced in. He found 2 barrels in the garage with a couple plastic recycling bins and a heavy garbage pail. The garbage pail wailed so much when we filled it with water that it took 3 of us to lift it into the van. Johnny and I managed the recycling bins together. We did everything as quietly we could, but of course, if anyone heard the car motor, they'd know something was up. The rule is family first, and Matt said everyone thought of us as Mrs. Nesbit's family, so we should be okay. But it was still scary until we got both cars loaded and both engines running. Then, of course, I had to drive down the driveway onto the road and into our driveway into the sunroom, or to the sunroom door. The important thing I kept telling myself was not to panic. There were no cars on the road, so I wasn't going to hit anybody. It was more of a question of whether I'd hit a tree. I kept my hands locked on the steering wheel and drove about 5 miles an hour. The whole trip couldn't have taken more than 5 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. If I was that nervous driving, I knew I wasn't ready to die. John arrived with the wheelbarrow, which he left in the garage. Then he and Matt and I unloaded cars. We put everything in the kitchen and to be gone through later. I thought Mom was going to cry when she saw all the water. Matt asked me if I was going to go back with him and bring Mrs. Nesbit to the hospital. Before I had a chance to agree, Mom said no. Miranda's done enough. Johnny, go with your brother. Mom, you heard me. You say you want to be treated like an adult, then behave like one. Miranda said her goodbyes to Mrs. Nesbit. Mine too, I'm sure. It's your turn to do so, and I expect you will. Okay, Johnny said. He sounded so young, I wanted to hug him. It's going to take a while. Don't open the door while we're gone. You should be fine, but don't take any chances. We'll be safe. Be careful. I love you both. After they left, I made Mom drink one of the bottles of water. Then I sat with her and told her about the conversation I had with Mrs. Nesbit and pulled out the pendant out of the Santa bag and handed it to her. It was her 50th birthday present, Mom. It was her 50th birthday present, Mom said. Her husband gave it to her. There was a big surprise party. I think she was genuinely surprised. Bobby brought Sally home for the party, and we all knew it was serious. They got married that year. She told me to give you her photo albums. I bet there's pictures from the party. Oh, I'm sure there are. Here, help me with the class. I'd like to think she'd know I'm wearing the pendant. I helped Mom with it. She's gotten so thin I could see her shoulder blades. She gave me this brooch. She loved that brooch, Mom said. It was her grandmother's. Cherish it, Miranda. That's a special gift. Then I went back to work. The bottles and jugs got moved to the kitchen. I put the food in the pantry, and then I changed Mom's sheets. I took a pot, filled it with water, and after it had heated up, I helped Mom shampoo her hair. I hid the baseball cards and chocolate and put everything else away. Matt and John got home about supper time. They had seen Peter, and there was no problem with the hospital taking Mrs. Nesbit. Then we ate tuna and red beans and pineapple chunks. We toasted the best friend we'll ever have. November 8th. Mom hobbled her way, which she probably shouldn't have done, into the pantry this afternoon. Matt and Johnny were done chopping their wood chopping things. I left Mom alone in the pantry for a while. I'm losing all sense of time. But then I figured I better make sure she hadn't fallen. So I went in the pantry and found her sitting on the floor weeping. I put my arm around her and her shoulder and let her cry. After a while, she calmed down and then she embraced me. I helped her up and she leaned on me as we went back to the sunroom. I've never loved Mom so much as I love her now. I almost feel some of Mrs. Nesbitt's love for Mom has seeped into me. November 10th, Peter came over this afternoon. Each time I see him, he looks 5 years older. He didn't talk much to us. He just lifted Mom off her mattress, blankets and all, and carried her into the living room. They stayed there a long time. Matt and John came in while they were there, and we all whispered so Mom wouldn't be disturbed by the sound of our voices. When they came back into the sunroom, Peter put Mom down so gently on her mattress, I almost wept. There was so much love and kindness in that gesture. Peter told us to take care of Mom and make sure she doesn't try to do too much. We promised we would. I wonder if Dad was ever gentle with Mom. I wonder if he's that gentle now with Lisa. November 11th, Veterans Day, national holiday. Matt stayed home from the post office. I think this is the funniest thing ever. November 15th. I went to my room to look for cleaner socks, and while I was up there, I decided to weigh myself. I had on a fair number of layers of clothes. Even though we have a wood stove going all day and night, the sides of the sunroom don't get too warm. And of course, leaving the sunroom to go into the pantry and kitchen or upstairs is like hiking to the North Pole. You just don't stroll there in a bikini. I had on my underwear and my long johns. Sometimes I remember how upset I was when Mom bought them last spring, and now I thank her over and over, at least in my mind. And jeans and sweatpants and 2 shirts and a sweatshirt and a winter coat, 2 pairs of socks and shoes. I didn't bother with the scarf. I kept my gloves in my pocket because I knew I wasn't going to be upstairs too long. For the great weigh-in, I took off my shoes and my coat. According to the scale, my clothes and I weighed 96 pounds. I don't think that's too bad. Nobody starves to death at 96 pounds. I weighed 118 last spring. My real concern is how much muscle I've lost. I was in good shape from all the swimming, and now I don't do anything except carry firewood and shiver. I'd like to get back to the pond and do some more skating, but I feel guilty leaving Mom alone. When I left her alone to visit Mrs. Nesbitt, I was doing something for someone else, but skating would be just for me, and I just can't justify that. Matt and John are both thin, but they look like they're pure muscle. Mom looks skinny and sickly. She's been eating less than the rest of us for a while now, and she's also started out weighing more, so I don't think she's at a starvation level either. We have food, but we're so careful with it. Who knows when we'll get any more? Even Peter doesn't bring us any when he visits. Thanksgiving's next week. I wonder if we'll have anything to be thankful for. November 18th, Matt came flying home from the post office today. There was a letter from Dad. The only problem was the letter was sent before the other one. So I guess he wrote a letter between the two, and we've already gotten. This one was from Ohio. It didn't say much, that he and Lisa were doing well, and so far they had enough gas and food, and camping out was fun. They met lots of other families who were also going south or west, and he even ran into someone he'd known in college. Lisa threw in a PS to say she could feel the baby move. She was sure it was a boy, but Dad was equally sure it was a girl. It was so strange getting that letter. I couldn't understand why Matt was so happy. It wasn't like there was any new news in it, since we know Dad and Lisa made it farther west than that. But Matt said it still means mail is traveling and it's totally unpredictable. So a new letter from Dad could arrive anytime. Sometimes I feel like I miss Dad and Sammy and Dan more than I miss Megan and Mrs. Nesbitt. They all deserted me, but I can't blame Megan or Mrs. Nesbitt for not writing. I know I can't blame Dad or Sammy or Dan either, or I shouldn't blame them, which is more accurate. I have no privacy, but I feel so alone. November 20th. It was -10 when I went out with the bedpan. I'm pretty sure that was early afternoon. Matt keeps chopping wood. There's already too much in the dining room, so we started a pile in the living room. I wonder if we'll have any trees left by the time winter ends, if it ends. We still have water, but we have to ration it. November 24th, Thanksgiving. Even Mom didn't pretend we had anything to be thankful for. November 25th. Matt came home today from the post office with 2 special treats. One was Peter. The other was a chicken. It wasn't that much of a chicken, maybe a little bigger than a Cornish hen, but it was dead and plucked and ready for cooking. I guess Matt knew he'd be getting it and had arranged for Peter to join us in our day after Thanksgiving feast. There was a moment when I thought about where the chicken had come from and what Matt must have given up for us to have it. But then I decided to hell with it. It was a chicken, a real honest to goodness, not from a can chicken. And I'd be a fool to look at a gift chicken in the mouth. No matter what Matt might have given up for the chicken, it would have been worth it for the look in Mom's eyes when she saw it. She was happier than she had been in weeks. Since the only way we could cook it is on top of the wood stove, that we were kind of limited. But we put the chicken in a pot with a can of chicken broth and salt and pepper and rosemary and tarragon. The smell was heaven. We made rice and string beans too. It was wonderful beyond description. I forgot what actual chicken tastes like. I think we could each have eaten the entire chicken, but we shared it civilly. I had a leg and 2 bites of thigh. Peter and John broke the wishbone. John won, but it didn't matter. We all had the same wish. November 26th. I guess the chicken really revitalized Mom because today she decided we were all wasting our lives and we had to stop. Of course, it's true, but it was pretty funny that Mom felt the need to make a big deal of it. So have any of you done a bit of schoolwork for fall? You too, Matt, have you? Well, of course not. We tried not to look shamefaced. Bad us for not doing algebra when the world's coming to an end. I don't care what you study, but you have to study something. Pick one subject and work on that. I want to see open textbooks. I want to see some learning going on here. Ugh, I absolutely refuse to study French. If I ever go to France, I'll never meet anyone. I'll never go to France, and I'll never meet anyone from France. For all we know, there isn't a France. So don't study French. Study history. We may not have a future, but you can't deny we have a past. That was the first time I ever heard Mom say that about the future. It shocked any possible fight out of me. So I picked history as my subject. John picked algebra, and Matt said he'd help him with it. Matt admitted he'd been wanting to read some philosophy, and Mom said if I wasn't going to use my French textbook. I don't know how long this burst of studying is going to last, but I understand Mom's point. The other night, I dreamed I found myself in school for a final, and not only had I not been to class and didn't know anything, but the school was just the way it had been, and everybody was there. It was normal looking, and I was dressed in layers of clothes I hadn't washed in days, and everyone stared at me like I was a drop-in from hell. At least now, if it's a history test, I'll have a fighting chance of knowing some of the answers. November 30th. There's nothing like schoolwork to make a person want to play hooky. I told Mom I wanted to go for a walk. She said, well, why don't you? You've been spending entirely too much time indoors. I love her, but I could throttle her. So I layered up and walked over to Mrs. Nesbitt's house. I don't know what I was looking for or what I was expecting to find, but the house had been ransacked since the day she died. That was to be expected. We'd taken everything we could, but there was stuff like furniture that we didn't need and other people had taken for themselves. It felt funny walking around the empty house. It reminded me of Megan's house when I got there, like the house itself was dead. After I walked around for a while, I realized what I wanted to do was explore the attic. Maybe I hadn't gone through, or at least not as thoroughly. And sure enough, even though all the boxes had been open and content spilled out, there's plenty of stuff left in there. And that's when I knew I was looking for a Christmas present for Matt. John had baseball cards, Mom had chocolates, but I wanted Matt to have something too. Most of us was lying on the floor was old linens, tablecloth, stuff like that. But there were piles of old clothes too. Nothing anyone could have found usable. When I'd gone through the attic the first time, it had been crowded with boxes, but everything was neatly packed away. Now it was chaos. Not that it mattered. I'd looked through piles of things, through boxes, and had been gone through and nothing taken out. And finally, I found something I could give Matt. It was a dozen or so different colored pencils from an old color by number picture set. The pictures had all been colored in, but their backs were blank, so I decided to take them too. Back in high school, Matt had done some drawing. I wasn't sure he'd even remember it, but I did because he did a sketch of me in a much better layback position than I'd ever really managed. Mama had loved it and watched and wanted to hang it up, but it embarrassed me because I knew it wasn't really me, and I threw a tantrum until she gave up on the idea. I guess she kept the picture, but I don't know where she hid it. At some point, Matt's going to stop chopping firewood, and when he does, he can take up art again to go along with his philosophy studies. I went through the other stuff in the attic, but the pencils were definitely the high point. So I thanked Mrs. Nesbitt and went home. Just to be sneaky, I went through the front door and took the color by number set to my bedroom before returning to the sunroom. We may not have a chicken for Christmas dinner, but at least there'll be presents. December 1st. For the third straight day, the temperature was above 0 this afternoon, so I took Mom's skates and went to the pond. There was no one there. I'm really starting to think that whole Brandon thing was a hallucination. In a funny way, it was better that I was alone since I never am at home. Mom can definitely hobble around now, so I don't have to hover around her all the time, but it's too cold in the house to spend much time anyplace but the sunroom. I skated around the pond, nothing fancy and incredibly slow. I had to be careful since there were chunks of ice missing. I guess people have been hacking away at it for water, the way we will once Mrs. Nesbitt's water runs out. The air is so bad, I don't know how Matt and Johnny manage. I'd skate for a few minutes and start coughing. I probably didn't skate more than 15 minutes total, but I was exhausted by the time I finished, and it took most of my strength to get back home. Matt, Mom, and I are down to 1 meal a day, but at least we're eating 7 days a week. And maybe the temperature is really warming up, and that'll make things better.